Welcome to week 4. The content this week is about sampling. Let's say, for instance, we would like to know what America's favorite type of music is. Well, we're probably not going to stand outside a symphony hall and ask people as they enter, "Oh, what's your favorite music?" So the whole week's content this week is focused on how we gather samples, the difference between a sample and a population, and how do we know our sample is correct for what we want to measure. Section 1 will look at the difference between a sample and a population. You have to determine what we are trying to draw a conclusion about. And then the question is, how do you gather those samples that will actually measure what you want to know? So for instance, it's impossible to sample every single person in the United States. So then we have to decide, well, maybe we could just ask 50 people in each state. Will that work? Well, we'll find out. We'll find the difference between a population and a sample. Section 2 will look at the different ways of gathering samples. We want to make sure our sample is representative of the population. So we have different methods in sampling, and some of those are called stratified, cluster, systematic, and we'll talk about each one of those sampling techniques. In the last section, we'll talk about what a sampling bias is. We want to make sure that our sample actually represents our population and avoids bias. In the first example we mentioned about the music, our sample is going to be a little biased because probably the majority of our survey, if we're standing in front of a symphony hall, will say their favorite music is classical. An example of voluntary response bias is some of those Facebook polls that you see on Facebook. So we'll talk about the different types of bias and how to avoid that. So that's what we'll talk about in this week. Make sure that you stay ahead of all the due dates, don't get behind, and if you have any questions, make sure you ask either through the discussion board or ask me, again, email, text, or phone. And remember, there is a project at the end of the week that will tie everything together. So, best wishes.